All right, welcome back. I think I know everybody, but if not, Mike Manrod, lead the security team at Grand Canyon, and from a cyber perspective, and with my esteemed colleague,
Cyrus Duncan. I'm a SOC analyst here at GCE.
and he also serves the informal roles of detection engineering, and also one of our DevSecOps experts. So what we're going to talk about is lateral movement and interrupting the intrusion, and basically the process of at a very, very high level of how we put what you've been learning today in this workshop into action in our SOC, and just kind of our high level strategy as it relates to detecting lateral movement. A huge part of one of the initial things we get, kind of working through our control layers, one of the main things we get, and this slide is intended to make everybody hungry, for happy hour after or whatever. I know everybody wants to dig into the 7 layer dip, but I mean, most mature environments these days have a lot of layers, right? We have things like web application firewalls, stopping bad things from the internet, protecting websites. Hopefully you've got, whether they're in the cloud or whether they're on-prem, you've got firewalls blocking, network-based attacks that WAFs aren't so well adapted to. And then hopefully there's segmentation and other barriers. But really, this whole NDR space, or lateral movement detection space, NDR, for those who don't know, is the acronym is network detection and response, but really it's just that whole paradigm of finding bad things moving across the wire, and containing them, shutting them down before they do real harm. For those everybody is obviously, I think, familiar looking around this room with the Lockheed Martin kill chain cyber attack. That whole paradigm is based upon the notion of stopping bad things, because really you have to move through. People say, well, the attacker only has to be right once. I kind of cringe when I hear that. It's true, but it's actually not true. Yeah, the attacker has to be right once to get initial access, and maybe their objectives are super primitive. But if they're trying to pull off a complex goal, whether it's a nation state adversary trying to steal some specific secrets, whether it is a ransomware operator, probably our most common use case, trying to laterally move through an environment, deploy ransomware, pull out data for that double extortion we always read about. Well, they've got to do actually quite a bit there, and they have to be right many times in a chain. And detection engineering and lateral movement detection is about, stopping and interrupting that cycle. Well, one of the main things that obviously we're here talking about Corelight and Zeek and Suricata, but in general, by definition, an inbound web traffic that's made it past an NDR, made it past a WAF, that's made it past a WAF and past a firewall that sets off an NDR or a detection, is by definition high fidelity, especially if that detection lines up with the type of software that resource is running. So you can do some pretty quick triage of inbound from internet destined to a server. The server is running the type of software that the attack signature aligns with. Well, now you've got something that you really want to look at. And I've found it makes a really, really great check for looking behind what WAFs and firewalls miss. Because if there's one thing things like Log4Shell have taught us, where there's constant barrages, adversaries are pretty good at getting around these things, and we need layers of protection, detection, and response. I'm still waiting for when we get to dig into that dip there.
All right, and as we handle lateral movement, right, with the principle of assumed breach, right? Let's say credentials were stolen, Spring for show, log4j was achieved. They're on a web host. They're going to start to pivot, right? They want to spread. They want to either not go past persistence. They want to hop on an endpoint, a server, something of that nature. Well, tools such as Cobalt Strike, Brutel, and those type of tools have those features built in, or there's principles of living off the land, which is using built-in Windows or Linux tools or the actual baked-in operating system tools at their disposal to achieve these goals of lateral movement. And not every signature is going to detect that, right? We aren't going to be able to write a million signatures off of notepad.exe because they found a way to pass in a exapoint of commands to make a connection on every host or ping every host on that subnet, right? So with those with that idea and that paradigm, using something like Zeek based off the behavioral analysis to not only detect on common ports, HTTP, DNS, SMB, things of that nature, we want to detect through lateral movement in this sense based on behavioral. Okay, we're seeing a detection on an endpoint that may have clicked a phishing link and hopped over to our Outlook server. Why are they trying to set SMB to our Outlook server, right? And this, with Zeek, we can get not only the full picture of the network via the con.log you saw, through, let's say if they logged in with a different user, you can see the Kerberos or NTLM logs. You can see any SMB traffic logs and actually extract the files that they're sending back and forth through the host. And you can pull those PCAP actual files out through Corelight for actual documentation reasons and prove, here's what happened on this endpoint, here's what they moved, and here's how we blocked it.
Yeah, definitely. So, what that begins to provide us when we look at this from like an architecture, engineering, and strategy perspective is having that east-west visibility for the things that your big zones and segmentation firewalls can't see. And obviously this couples well with strategies like micro-segmentation. There's a lot of things you can do there. There's a whole lot to the game of data center security, and this is just one piece. But I like the idea of having quality detection for lateral movement where you've got one piece to detect from a signature base what's known to be bad. In this case, Suricata is what we use within a Corelight paradigm. But then Zeek to investigate what those signatures say. Who in the rooms looked at a firewall signature at some point, either in your career or just experimenting, playing around? Maybe you've loaded things on pfSense for students, those who are professionals. Who's looked at a firewall log, looked at a detection and said, what the heck does that even mean? I mean, I've been on the vendor side before. Like I put in firewalls and like I'm, in customer environments and done health checks, and I'm looking at this log. I'm like, okay, I've got this high, but what is it? How do I know if it's a true positive, false positive? Where's the data? Where's the beef? It's really, really hard to tell what's actually happening. So some NDRs will do a full PCAP of all traffic, but that gets very expensive, very, very resource intensive. And the more you store, the shorter your look back is. If you're like, well, I'm ready to spend big bucks. Well, the problem is it's inefficient. You're not spending those big bucks well. So with PCAP, you don't get as much look back for a given amount of money for a given storage cost. So what I like about Zeek and Suricata is Suricata gives you can pair it with something like ET Pro, various subscriptions. You can kind of build your own so you're not stuck in the black box paradigm of a lot of NDRs. But then it's not just this detection. We're like, what the heck does that mean? You can actually use Zeek to go in and investigate and see what it means, see what the traffic is. Again, PCAP lets you do that too, but Zeek lets you do it in a way that's very, very efficient, elegant, and as you learned in the class today, pretty easy to learn to understand and do. It can be very, very robust, but it can be very, very simple.
So what's really nice about Zeek, and one thing I like to think of it as, and one of my instructors taught me, is I like to correlate or use the analogy of it being a flight recorder. It provides better data or metadata, better metadata or data for faster event resolution. So when I'm looking into NTLM logs, SSH logs, HTTP connections, I can immediately start to see and correlate based off that UID or that session what the attacker is attempting to do. right? So in the correlation to print nightmare, just because the vulnerability exists and the most common was not Petya, let's say they're executing a different process for other malicious means, right? For persistence, for lateral movement, just to maybe even get an initial foothold and just stick on that one host, right? That is what the type of traffic I like to detect off of these, off of Zeek. And that gives us a really great correlation based off of not only that session, but if I were to go from a more holistic approach and look at all the sessions on this host, I can easily start to realize, okay, this NTLM authentication is not normal. Why are they attempting to do, I'll say, an NTLM relay? Or why are they trying to pivot to an FTP connection with anonymous and start spamming our FTP connection, trying to see, can I pivot on this FTP server, right? But what's really cool is that metadata and that extracted payload can enhance our detection capabilities tenfold. So I like to think of threat detection as more of an art and a science, right? There are multiple type of moving parts when it correlates to threat detection. And what there also is there's no silver bullet. Like I alluded to earlier, there's no certain signature that can block everything associated with a vulnerability. For example, like Log4j, we can detect and block or remove classes or start patching. But if I were to create a detection to say, hey, block everything using Log4j, we wouldn't have logging on any of our web applications or our FTP servers and anything like that, because normal legitimate traffic would also get blocked. What's really cool about Zeek is I can start to use threat detection and Zeek to correlate, okay, well, if the URI, the actual JDNI string, is this certain thing, or let's say not Pat yet, SMB is a certain function, it will actually block based off of more parameters and more capabilities, not just say, hey, everything associated with this traffic, block it across the board, because you might create some headaches on the availability side of the CI triad.
I love that you brought up block too, because on the whole, we think of NDR as detect, and that is usually what it is. But at a certain maturity point where we're also implementing SOAR, or security orchestration, automation, and response, you actually could take, now, would I take Suricata signatures and pipe them straight into a block? Maybe not. But if we have the context of, say, a user entity behavior analytics alert of an account that then relates to a network problem on the Suricata side in Corelight, and then maybe we have some other reason to suspect that asset, you could program your SIM to take those 3 data points, build a scenario, and then maybe all those things put together, you could potentially issue a reset or lock out an account, or add something to a block list, or take some sort of a SOAR automation rule. So, I mean, the first layer is about detection and response, but it can circle all the way back to control. We've already touched on Log4Shell, and obviously Sunburst. You got some great conversations about Sunburst earlier in the day and the whole SolarWinds incident. But I mean, one thing we've gotten used to, those of us who've been either in cyber for a while or following cyber for a while as a student, the one thing we notice is there's these crises that come in waves. And obviously individual orgs go through their waves and ebbs and flows of various forms of crises. But there's big community crises, like Log4Shell, I like to call the issue that canceled Christmas, because it literally canceled all of our PTO for Christmas that year. And because it hit right before, and it took weeks to clean up all the messes and remediate everything. And for us, we were doing 5 times a day cadence meetings in the beginning with like 30-40 people on a call across multiple infrastructure teams, just to find it and clean it up and fix it everywhere and track and prioritize risk across assets. Well, and when things like that, I love community-based platforms, especially for detection, because on things you're blocking, okay, maybe you want some curation and some QA, you probably do. But on detection, like the NDR space, you want the opposite. You want speed, because if you get a false positive in a SOC, you can tune it, you can move on, you can refine, but you want to see it and look at it. unlike, a firewall blocking at the edge or a WAF where you're blocking prod traffic. So what you can do is take a community-centric approach where you ingest things fast. If something like Log4Shell's breaking and 15 minutes into the press release and Twitter's blowing up, somebody throws a Suricata signature they just wrote, detecting an attack that was late and breaking 30 minutes ago. In an open platform, you can load that in, detect that in your environment, and you're finding something hours and hours before the big black box solutions are putting out their custom detection rules. So it's really, really powerful to be able to detect this stuff fast. Now, in a perfect world, I'd be spanning traffic, and we'd have like a stack of every solution. Why not? Why not have like lots of cakes and eat all of them? Even if you have unlimited money, that's great. But if you have a mature SOC, call it like skilled people who know what they're doing, and you want a team that's empowered to engage with the community, able to ingest intelligence and then actualize that intelligence in a platform. If I can only choose one thing, I'll take that over a black box any day.
Another good point is Zeek packages, community Zeek packages for things like Eternal Blue. There's one called Eternal Safety, written during a contest by Lexi, who immediately allowed us to get that context in the NDR instance and immediately start detecting Print Nightmare as it's occurring the same day. So things of that nature is a really, really cool package. Zeek packages are really cool. The community on the forums share new ones all the time, and things that we at the SOC look at a lot, especially during instances like Log4j.
Yeah, well, that's such a wonderful example. Yeah, I'd always rather have the intelligence of the entire community, not just the intelligence of one company.
All right, so combining the power and of an EDR and an NDR. So we know from a network, more holistic perspective, what's going on at a network, right? We see, oh, this host may have been sending a bunch of weird traffic or downloading a bunch of weird malicious Trojans, or we're seeing scareware on the host where a bunch of weird domains are coming off. Well, what's cool about Zeek and an EDR is, well, first off, here's a little interesting fact. There's actually a component of Zeek built into Windows Defender. They use that all the time on their host-based firewall. And secondly, when we use it as a SOC, is we can see this traffic and start correlating it to, okay, what processes are hitting that? What host is doing this and what host isn't? So we can actually use the NDR to detect and start from a more holistic view, see which hosts are making, let's say for example, connections to a C2 instance. We can go through an EDR and actually write scripts to not only remediate that traffic, but start to see and threat hunt across the board in CrowdStrike and in Corelight to not only handle remediations, but detect new things and threat hunt. A good example of this is utilizing Corelight with scareware. We get scareware a lot on our instances. We get a lot of those notification pop-ups saying, hey, McAfee needs you to download this or call this number or something of that nature. We can use Corelight to not only see that traffic in a network perspective, but we can also have it automatically remediate through SOAR in CrowdStrike.
Yeah, definitely. So one other use case kind of with NDR in general and Zeek specifically is enriching your asset management data. Now, obviously, asset management is a complex topic and there's a lot of disparate needs there, right? So, asset management could mean, especially for students getting a feel for the lay of the land, asset management could be like people barcode scanning physical things that they're issuing out to people. It could mean finding rogue devices on a network. It could be making sure and validating you have your agent compliance. NDR doesn't necessarily fit in every aspect of asset management, but it's super critical for that piece of detecting unknown or untracked assets. And if you have your NDR tracking and finding what's on the wire through good visibility with a properly scoped, spanning of traffic, and hopefully things are in the proper segments, but you can even find out when they're not, right? But the other thing it can help you to do is if you, in your SIM, in your security information and event management tool, if you have your agents reporting up the assets they're running on, if you have IoT inventories from your vulnerability management tools, you can then write correlations on and detections on when does NDR find an asset that isn't on any of those other lists. And like our esteemed colleague Christian wrote a great dashboard that shows us our agent compliance and like, oh, here's all the things not running this, here's all the things not running that. And the struggle is real with agent compliance and things getting out of cycle. NDR helps you manage that and reduce the risk.
So Zeek really allows your SOC to be run in the driver's seat. For example, we have had a ton of old tools that only provide, for example, PCAP inspection. And we have to be very particular about what PCAPs we want to investigate, right? Because this can be very expensive, or can run down systems based off of the PCAPs you're inspecting, in the sense of maybe you want to pull it, edit it, you have to download it. There's a lot of extra steps where when you're running Zeek and Suricata, what's really cool is not only does you have the Suricata for the IDS portion, but for NSM with Zeek, it's pretty streamlined. It's pretty fast. As you can see within your classroom today and Splunk, you could pull any sort of logs from any endpoint on across the entire network, which is awesome for a SOC when we're looking for, let's say, strange SMB or SSH traffic, because there's different collections, right? So one collection is any encrypted traffic, so that SSH.log. Another one is that C2 collection. So when you're starting to see C2 commands, not only can we go threat hunt off of that, but if we find a detection off of one, we can easily go across the entire network and go drive and go find any other endpoints that may have that exact same thing. Or if in the context of lateral movement, where did they hop to? Now, Zeek does a great job not only logging that and finding that, but what's really cool is you can now easily see from a more holistic standpoint all of that and kind of pinpoint down, okay, I need to look at this host. This host needs to be remediated from simply a browser reset or even a quarantine device to, oh, this person, we need to actually go do physical forensics on this host due to the nature of this was all stemming from a certain host. What's even cool and what I find interesting is that a lot of modern firewalls, even with layer 7, are often bad about this technique, right? They have signature-based detections, so we'll get a heads up like, hey, we're seeing some WordPress enumeration attempts on this host, but they won't tell us other than maybe a URI max. What was the response on some of them? Where was it coming from? Sometimes it can be kind of partial, where Zeek gives us that full view of saying, okay, here's the IP that was originating and sending that request. Here's the actual host that it tried to hit, and here's the actual, as you saw earlier, based off the history, the SYNAC and the full handshake. Did it make a full handshake? Is it a scan? Is it a half handshake? Are they trying to enumerate something? Are they trying to pull services? You can pretty easily find that from a Zeek perspective. Now, when you combine that with the power of Suricata, which is also open source, it is really, really great in the sense of you can not only see what's going on, but you can research through the open source documentation, GitHub READMEs. I find the Suricata forums and the Zeek forums really awesome. Emerging threats is another set of tools that we look at for signature based to give us context on, okay, here's what we're seeing, but here's why you're seeing it, right? Because as Mike kind of alluded to, when we started with these black boxes, it would alert all sorts of stuff going, hey, WordPress is being updated. Okay, like what does that mean? Is it being updated by one of our people? Is it being updated by an adversary and they're defacing our website? Well, what's the context of this? And Zeek really gives that background of going, oh, okay, it's internal. It's just a quick update on jQuery. Or, oh, this is actually an attack from a different country, then they're defacing our website as we speak. We need to escalate and handle that instant. When you can see that from a really fast view and right in your SIM, it's really really helpful.
Yeah, it's a pretty sleek experience. I mean, I've spent like a lot of years looking at, I've played with a lot of different NDRs and approaches. Personally, like I've struggled if my only view is the view of a black box solution telling me what's important and kind of framing it for me, versus something where we can actually see and dive into the detections. It really puts the sock in the driver's seat and lets us tailor the evolution and the experience. With that, any questions from anybody in the room?
I will say, based off of the signatures we get, we do curate different alerts off of the different signatures through Suricata with emerging threats. So we'll start to get signatures for suspicious DNS queries, scareware, things like that. We like to interpret that and pretty heavily add that to our detection logic as a whole. So they're both really great tools and great platforms. It's an open source experience.
Definitely.
I think you should think about